A leader forged in fire. In the quiet village of Mvizo, nestled in South Africa's Eastern Cape, a child was born who would shake the foundations of an entire nation. On July 18, 1918, Rolihlahla Mandela entered the world, his name meaning, pulling the branch of a tree, or, as some elders whispered with knowing smiles, troublemaker. Little did they know how prophetic those words would prove to be. The boy who would become Nelson Mandela grew up in a world of rolling hills and endless skies, where mud huts dotted the landscape and cattle grazed freely. His father, Gadla Henrimfakaniiswa, was a counselor to the Thembu king, commanding respect throughout their community. His mother, Nosekeni Fanny, raised him with Christian values and an unshakable belief in justice. Young Rolihlahla's childhood was painted with simple pleasures, running barefoot through green fields, swimming in crystal streams, and sitting around crackling fires listening to elders recount tales of brave warriors and wise chiefs. These stories planted seeds of greatness in his young heart, though no one could have imagined they would grow into a movement that would change the world. When tragedy struck and his father died, 9-year-old Mandela's life took a dramatic turn. His mother brought him to the royal palace of Chief Janjantaba Dalindyebo, where he would witness firsthand how true leaders govern. The chief welcomed him like a son, and for the first time, Mandela glimpsed a world beyond his village, a world where decisions affected thousands of lives. At 7 years old, Mandela began his formal education at a local Methodist school. It was here that his teacher, Miss Mdingane, gave him the English name, Nelson, a common practice for African children in colonial schools. Though he didn't understand why he needed to abandon his birth name, young Mandela accepted this change and threw himself into his studies with fierce determination. He devoured every book he could find, particularly stories of African heroes who had fought against colonial oppression. His favorite subjects were history and literature, and he spent countless hours reading about great leaders and their struggles. Even as a child, Mandela understood that education was his pathway to something greater. The awakening, seeing injustice with clear eyes. As Mandela grew older, the harsh realities of apartheid South Africa became impossible to ignore. The country operated under a system of racial segregation that kept black and white citizens completely separate, and utterly unequal. Black South Africans were forbidden from voting, owning land in most areas, or living in the same neighborhoods as whites. They were forced to carry identity passes at all times, like prisoners in their own homeland. At 16, Mandela participated in the traditional Xhosa initiation ceremony that marked his passage into manhood. During this sacred ritual, tribal elders spoke not just of adult responsibilities, but of their people's suffering under white rule. They painted a picture of a proud nation reduced to servants and laborers, their dignity stripped away by unjust laws. Those words ignited something profound within Mandela. He felt a calling, not just to succeed personally, but to fight for his people's freedom. This sense of mission would drive every decision he made for the rest of his life. When Chief Janjantaba arranged a marriage for the 19-year-old Mandela, the young man made a choice that would define his character forever. Rather than accept the traditional path laid out for him, he chose to forge his own destiny. In a bold move that shocked his family, Mandela fled to Johannesburg to pursue his education and his dreams. City of Gold, Heart of Steel. Johannesburg in the 1940s was a city of stark contrasts. Gleaming skyscrapers rose above sprawling townships where black workers lived in poverty. The gold mines that made the city wealthy were worked by black laborers who earned barely enough to survive, while white mine owners accumulated vast fortunes. Mandela arrived with little more than hope and determination. He found work as a night security guard at a gold mine, spending his days sleeping and his evenings studying by candlelight in a cramped room he shared with other workers. The conditions were harsh, but Mandela's spirit remained unbroken. He understood that every sacrifice was an investment in a better future. While working at the mine, Mandela met Walter Sisulu, a successful businessman who recognized the young man's potential. Sisulu became both mentor and friend, helping Mandela find work as a law clerk and supporting his educational ambitions. Through Sisulu, Mandela was introduced to the African National Congress, a political organization fighting for black rights. Mandela enrolled at the University of the Witwatersrand to study law, becoming one of only a handful of black students on campus. The discrimination he faced was constant and humiliating, but it only strengthened his resolve. He formed friendships with Indian and white students who opposed apartheid, learning that the fight for justice could unite people across racial lines. During his university years, Mandela joined the ANC Youth League, a group of young activists who believed the older generation was too passive in fighting apartheid. They called for mass action, strikes, boycotts, and civil disobedience. Mandela's natural charisma and powerful speaking ability quickly made him a leader among his peers. Love, law, and liberation. In 1944, Mandela married Evelyn Toko Mays, a nurse who shared his dreams of a free South Africa. Their love story was set against the backdrop of increasing political turmoil, as the apartheid government tightened its grip on the black population. Despite the challenges, they started a family together, with Evelyn supporting Mandela's political activities even when they kept him away from home for days at a time. Mandela's dream of becoming a lawyer finally came true in 1952 when he and his friend Oliver Tambo opened South Africa's first black law firm. Mandela and Tambo attorneys provided legal aid to black South Africans who were victims of apartheid laws. Every day, Mandela saw firsthand how the legal system was used as a weapon against his people, from past law violations to forced removals from their homes. The law firm became more than a business, it was a symbol of black achievement and resistance. Mandela spent his days in courtrooms defending the defenseless, and his evenings planning ANC activities. His reputation grew throughout Johannesburg as both a skilled lawyer and a passionate freedom fighter. The tide turns, from peaceful protest to armed resistance. In 1948, the National Party came to power and implemented even harsher apartheid laws. The Population Registration Act classified every South African by race. The Group Areas Act designated where each race could live. The Bantu Education Act severely limited black children's educational opportunities. These laws didn't just segregate, they systematically destroyed black families and communities. Mandela and his ANC colleagues responded with the Defiance Campaign of 1952, organizing peaceful protests against unjust laws. Thousands of volunteers deliberately broke apartheid regulations, accepting arrest as the price of resistance. Mandela himself was arrested multiple times, spending weeks in overcrowded prison cells with other activists. The campaign marked Mandela's emergence as a national leader. His speeches drew massive crowds, and his calls for unity resonated across racial lines. He preached nonviolence, inspired by Mahatma Gandhi's successful resistance movement in India. But the government's response was increasingly brutal. Protesters were beaten, jailed, and sometimes killed. The turning point came on March 21, 1960, in the township of Sharpeville. During a peaceful demonstration against past laws, police opened fire on unarmed protesters, killing 69 people and wounding 180 others. The Sharpeville massacre shocked the world and convinced Mandela that peaceful protest alone would never defeat apartheid. The government banned the ANC, forcing its leaders underground. Mandela helped establish Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation, the ANC's armed wing. Their strategy was sabotage, attacking government installations and infrastructure while avoiding civilian casualties. Mandela underwent military training and coordinated operations while living as a fugitive. The Black Pimpernel, a life in the shadows. For 18 months, Mandela lived underground, moving from safe house to safe house, always one step ahead of the police. The press nicknamed him the Black Pimpernel, after the fictional character who eluded capture during the French Revolution. He disguised himself as a chauffeur, a gardener, a businessman, whatever was necessary to continue his work. During this period, Mandela traveled across Africa, meeting with leaders who supported the anti-apartheid struggle. He received military training in Algeria and Ethiopia, learning guerrilla warfare tactics that could be used against the apartheid regime. He also addressed the Pan-African Freedom Movement, building international support for the ANC's cause. But the constant danger took its toll. Mandela couldn't see his family regularly, and he knew that capture was inevitable. The security police were closing in, using informants and advanced surveillance techniques to track him down. Every day brought new risks, new close calls, new reasons to worry about the safety of his fellow activists. Trial of a lifetime, the Rivonia treason trial. On August 5, 1962, Mandela's luck ran out. Police arrested him near Howick in KwaZulu-Natal, ending his life as a fugitive. He was initially charged with leaving the country illegally and inciting strikes, but the government had bigger plans for their most wanted man. In 1963, police raided the ANC's secret headquarters in Rivonia, arresting most of the organization's leadership and uncovering evidence of their sabotage activities. Mandela and his co-defendants were charged with sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government, crimes punishable by death. The Rivonia trial became an international sensation, with media from around the world covering every development. Mandela used the courtroom as his stage, delivering one of history's most powerful speeches in defense of justice and human dignity. "I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination," Mandela declared. "I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." The courtroom fell silent. The judge, faced with international scrutiny, sentenced Mandela and his co-defendants to life imprisonment rather than death. For Mandela, it meant the end of his freedom, but the beginning of his transformation into a global symbol of resistance. Robben Island, the University of Struggle. Robben Island, a windswept piece of land 7 miles off the coast of Cape Town, became Mandela's home for the next 18 years. The prison was designed to break the spirits of political prisoners through harsh labor, brutal treatment, and complete isolation from the outside world. Mandela's cell was 8 feet by 7 feet, with a straw mat for a bed and a bucket for a toilet. He was allowed 1 visitor and 1 letter every 6 months. The warders were deliberately chosen for their racism and cruelty, and they made Mandela's life miserable at every opportunity. Every day began with backbreaking labor in the limestone quarry, where prisoners worked in the blazing sun without adequate protection. The lime dust damaged Mandela's eyes permanently, but he refused to show weakness. During meal breaks, he would discuss philosophy and politics with his fellow prisoners, turning Robben Island into what they called the university. Despite the harsh conditions, Mandela never lost hope. He established routines that kept him mentally and physically strong, exercising in his cell every morning, studying by candlelight at night, and maintaining correspondence with the outside world whenever possible. He learned Afrikaans to better understand his captors and guards, believing that knowledge of their language and culture would help him negotiate South Africa's future. The younger prisoners looked to Mandela for guidance and inspiration. He taught them about leadership, discipline, and the importance of education. He mediated disputes and maintained morale during the darkest periods. Even in prison, Mandela was building the foundation for South Africa's future government. The drumbeat of freedom. As the years passed, Mandela's imprisonment became a rallying cry for anti-apartheid activists around the world. Free Nelson Mandela became one of the most recognizable protest chants in history, echoing in the streets of London, New York, and countless other cities. The international community gradually turned against apartheid South Africa. Economic sanctions crippled the country's economy, sports boycotts isolated South African teams from international competition, and cultural boycotts made apartheid a global pariah system. Musicians like Stevie Wonder, Bob Marley, and Harry Belafonte dedicated songs to Mandela, keeping his name alive in popular culture. Inside South Africa, the resistance continued to grow. New generations of activists, inspired by Mandela's sacrifice, took up the struggle. The 1976 Soweto uprising, led by schoolchildren protesting inferior education, shocked the world with its images of police brutality against young protesters. The movement Mandela had helped start was spreading beyond his ability to control it, and that was exactly what he had hoped for. Throughout his imprisonment, Mandela remained the ANC's moral center. Despite being cut off from direct communication, he influenced major decisions through smuggled messages and coded letters. When the organization debated whether to negotiate with the apartheid government, Mandela's voice carried the most weight, even from his prison cell. Secret negotiations and historic meetings. By the 1980s, even apartheid supporters realized the system was unsustainable. The country was becoming increasingly isolated internationally, the economy was struggling under sanctions, and violent resistance was escalating. President P.W. Botha began secret talks with Mandela, hoping to find a solution that would preserve white privilege while ending international pressure. Mandela approached these negotiations with characteristic wisdom and patience. He refused to accept freedom in exchange for abandoning the struggle, famously declaring, "What freedom am I being offered while the organization of the people remains banned? Only free men can negotiate. A prisoner cannot enter into contracts." The talks continued for years, with both sides slowly building trust. Mandela insisted that any negotiations must include all of South Africa's people and all of its political organizations. He also demanded the release of all political prisoners and the unbanning of political parties as preconditions for serious talks. When F.W. de Klerk became president in 1989, the pace of change accelerated dramatically. De Klerk understood that apartheid's days were numbered and that negotiating with Mandela offered the best hope for avoiding a racial civil war. He began dismantling apartheid laws and preparing for Mandela's release. The Walk to Freedom. February 11, 1990. The date is etched in history as one of humanity's great moments. After 27 years, 6 months, and 6 days in prison, Nelson Mandela walked through the gates of Victor Verster prison, hand in hand with his wife Winnie, into the warm South African sunshine. The world watched as this dignified man, his hair now grey but his step still strong, raised his fist in the ANC salute. His first public words emphasized reconciliation over revenge. "I stand here before you not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people. Today, the time for healing of wounds has come. The time to build is upon us." Mandela's release triggered celebrations across South Africa and around the world. But it also marked the beginning of the most challenging phase of his life. Now he had to transform from symbol to statesman, from prisoner to president of a deeply divided nation. The negotiations that followed were complex and often contentious. Multiple parties, the ANC, the National Party, the Inkatha Freedom Party, and others, had to agree on a new constitution and transition process. Violence erupted regularly as different factions struggled for power and influence. Many observers feared that South Africa would descend into civil war. Mandela's leadership during this period was masterful. He worked closely with de Klerk, despite their fundamental disagreements, to keep the transition on track. He reached out to white South Africans, assuring them they had a place in the new South Africa. He also worked to control radical elements within his own movement who wanted immediate and complete change. The birth of the Rainbow Nation. The breakthrough came in 1993 when all parties agreed to hold democratic elections in April 1994. For the first time in South African history, all citizens regardless of race would be able to vote for their government. The world watched with amazement and anticipation as this impossible dream became reality. April 27, 1994, dawned bright and clear across South Africa. From Cape Town to Johannesburg to rural villages, millions of people stood in long lines to cast their ballots. Many elderly black voters were voting for the first time in their lives, tears streaming down their faces as they marked their ballots. The day passed peacefully, with a festive atmosphere replacing the fear many had predicted. The results were decisive. The ANC won 62.6% of the vote, making Nelson Mandela South Africa's first black president. At 75 years old, the man who had spent nearly 3 decades in prison was now the leader of the nation that had imprisoned him. On May 10, 1994, Mandela was inaugurated as president in a ceremony attended by the largest gathering of world leaders in history. Kings and presidents, celebrities and activists, all came to witness this historic moment. In his inaugural address, Mandela declared, "Never, never and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another." The presidency, healing a divided nation. Mandela's presidency was defined by his extraordinary efforts to unite South Africa's diverse population. He understood that the country's future depended on racial reconciliation, not racial revenge. His symbolic gestures became legendary, wearing the Springbok jersey to present the Rugby World Cup trophy to the previously all-white South African team, learning Afrikaans to communicate with former enemies, and inviting his former prison guards to his presidential inauguration. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, became Mandela's signature initiative. Instead of pursuing war crimes trials against apartheid officials, the commission offered amnesty in exchange for full disclosure of past crimes. The process was painful but healing, allowing victims to confront their oppressors and society to confront its past honestly. Mandela's government faced enormous challenges. Decades of apartheid had left black South Africans with inferior education, limited economic opportunities, and inadequate healthcare. The new government had to address these inequalities while maintaining economic stability and reassuring white citizens that they remained welcome in the new South Africa. Progress was slower than many hoped. But Mandela's moral authority kept the country stable during the transition. His Rainbow Nation concept, the idea that South Africa's diversity was a strength rather than a weakness, gradually took root. Black and white children began attending school together, interracial marriages became legal and socially acceptable, and the country's multiple languages and cultures were celebrated rather than suppressed. Elder statesman, a legacy of service. True to his word, Mandela served only one term as president, stepping down in 1999 at the age of 81. His voluntary relinquishment of power set a powerful example for African leaders and proved his commitment to democratic principles over personal ambition. In retirement, Mandela remained active in causes close to his heart. He established the Nelson Mandela Foundation to promote education, rural development, and healthcare. He became a vocal advocate in the fight against HIV/AIDS, speaking openly about the disease when his son Makatho died of AIDS-related complications in 2005. Mandela also used his global stature to mediate international conflicts and promote human rights worldwide. He criticized the U.S. invasion of Iraq, mediated civil conflicts in Africa, and continued to speak out against injustice wherever he found it. His moral authority transcended national boundaries, making him one of the world's most respected voices for peace and justice. As he aged, Mandela gradually withdrew from public life, though he continued to make occasional appearances at important events. His 90th birthday celebration in London's Hyde Park drew 46,000 people and was broadcast to millions more around the world. World leaders competed to pay tribute to the man they called Madiba, his clan name that became a term of endearment for all South Africans. The final chapter, A Giant's Farewell. On December 5, 2013, Nelson Mandela died peacefully at his home in Johannesburg, surrounded by family members. He was 95 years old and had been in declining health for several years. His death marked the end of an era, not just for South Africa but for the entire world. The global outpouring of grief and admiration was extraordinary. World leaders, celebrities, and ordinary people from every continent shared their memories and tributes. His state funeral became one of the largest gatherings of world leaders in history, with over 100 current and former heads of state attending the ceremony. But perhaps the most moving tributes came from ordinary South Africans who waited in long lines to view his body lying in state. Black and white, rich and poor, young and old, they came together to say goodbye to the man who had shown them that reconciliation was possible, that forgiveness was stronger than hatred, and that one person really could change the world. Lessons from a life extraordinarily lived. Nelson Mandela's story offers profound lessons for anyone facing seemingly impossible challenges. His journey from rural village to international icon wasn't marked by easy victories or sudden breakthroughs. Instead, it was characterized by patience, persistence, and an unwavering commitment to his principles. First, Mandela showed us the power of education and self-improvement. Throughout his life, he never stopped learning, from his early days in Methodist school to his law studies at university to his years of reading philosophy and history in prison. He understood that knowledge was power and that personal growth was essential to effective leadership. Second, Mandela demonstrated the strength that comes from forgiveness. After 27 years in prison, he could have emerged bitter and vengeful. Instead, he chose reconciliation over retribution, understanding that healing required both sides to move beyond the past. His example showed that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's the ultimate expression of strength. Third, Mandela proved that principled leadership requires sacrifice. He gave up his freedom, his family time, and his personal comfort for the cause he believed in. But he never compromised his core values, even when doing so might have won him earlier release from prison or easier political victories. Finally, Mandela taught us that change is possible, no matter how entrenched the systems of oppression might seem. Apartheid looked permanent and impenetrable to many observers, but Mandela's patient resistance ultimately brought it down. His life reminds us that social justice movements require both immediate action and long-term commitment. The immortal legacy. Today, nearly a decade after his death, Nelson Mandela's influence continues to grow. Schools, streets, and institutions around the world bear his name. His autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, remains one of the most widely read memoirs in history. His speeches and quotes inspire new generations of activists, leaders, and ordinary people facing their own struggles. But Mandela's true legacy isn't found in monuments or museums. It lives in the democratic South Africa he helped create, where children of all races learn together in classrooms that were once segregated. It survives in the peaceful transitions of power that have become routine in South African politics. It thrives in the spirit of reconciliation that, despite ongoing challenges, continues to define the nation's approach to its problems. Around the world, Mandela's example continues to inspire those fighting for justice and equality. From civil rights activists in the United States to democracy advocates in authoritarian regimes, people facing oppression find strength in Mandela's story. His message is simple but profound: no injustice is permanent, no struggle is hopeless, and no prison, physical or metaphorical, can contain the human spirit forever. Nelson Mandela's extraordinary journey from prisoner to president proves that history's arc does indeed bend toward justice, but only when ordinary people make the extraordinary choice to bend it themselves. His life reminds us that we all have the power to choose hope over despair, love over hatred, and unity over division. In his own words, there is no passion to be found playing small, in settling for a life that is less than the one you are capable of living. Nelson Mandela never settled for less than what he was capable of, and his magnificent example continues to challenge all of us to reach for our own greatness, no matter how impossible our dreams might seem. The boy from Vizo became the man who changed the world. His story is finished, but his legacy is eternal. In every act of courage, every moment of forgiveness, and every stand taken for justice, the spirit of Nelson Mandela lives on, reminding us that freedom is not just a destination, it's a journey we must all take together.